The great hall of Ravenmoor had never felt colder, and the season had nothing to do with it. Corvain sat above them all on the black stone seat of Greymark, and every face below was turned upward, waiting. At his right hand stood the Dowager Verena, wearing silver and stillness the way a blade wears its sheath. Across the dais, Lady Ismene watched with the small, satisfied smile of a woman who already believed the throne was hers. Between the two tall pillars, alone stood the servant. Her name was Sorrel. She kept the lower halls, carried linens and ash and water, and a thin, pale scar ran from her jaw to the hollow of her throat. Long ago the court had decided a scarred maid was a thing to look past rather than at, yet she stood now with her hands folded and her chin level, and she did not lower her eyes from his, and that alone made the hall uneasy. A rumor had brought her here. They said the scarred maid had been speaking the Elfa King's name in the dark of the servants' wing, that she spoke of a bond. On the very eve of his match to a high-born Luna, a nobody had dared claim she belonged to him, and this, his grandmother had murmured before the doors opened. "One word from you and it dies tonight." Corvain looked down at the woman. Something in his chest pulled toward her, low and wordless, a tug with no name and no cause. He did not understand it, so he ignored it, the way a king learns to ignore a great many things. "Is it true," he asked, "that you have been speaking of me?" Sorrel was quiet a long moment. When she answered, her voice was low and even and carried further than a shout. "You told me once," she said, "that you would know me anywhere, in any life, beneath any moon." The hall held its breath. Corvain felt it then. His wolf. It came awake all at once and lunged toward her as though it would tear through his ribs to reach her. He had ruled this beast since boyhood, and it had never once defied him. Now it cried out a single word he could not hear, and it wanted her so fiercely that for one breath he could not draw air. He crushed it. He forced it down with everything he had, and the effort turned his voice to iron. "I have never known you," he said. "I do not know you now." Something crossed her face. Not surprise. She had expected this. That was somehow worse. "Please," she said, and it was not begging. It was a door held open one last time. His grandmother's hand settled on his shoulder, light as frost. Corvain's jaw tightened. When he spoke, he made the words flat and final. "The way you kill a thing cleanly so that it does not suffer. You are a servant," he said. "You are less than a servant. You mean nothing to me. Go, and do not let me hear your voice again." Silence swallowed the hall. Sorrel did not weep. She did not fall. For one heartbeat, she simply looked at him, and in her eyes there was no hatred at all, only a grief so old and so quiet that it made the whole gleaming court seem small and cheap around it. Then she inclined her head. Once, the way a person bows to a stranger, she turned, and she walked away. She did not hurry. She did not stumble. She crossed the long hall between the rows of watching nobles with her back straight, a poor scarred woman, carrying more dignity out the door than all of them held in their blood. The great doors opened. The cold came in. And then she was gone into the dark, gone toward the gate, gone, Corvain told himself. He felt nothing. He was still telling himself that when it happened. As she passed the outer wards, something inside him tore. It was not pain exactly. It was the feeling of a rope you did not know you were holding, as it slips through your fingers and drops into black water. He gripped the arm of the throne. His wolf, which had raged a moment before, went suddenly and horribly still. Verena was watching him. So was Ismene. Neither of them was watching the door. "It is done," his grandmother said softly. "You did well." Corvain said nothing. He stared at the empty space where the scarred woman had stood, and could not have said why his hands would not stop shaking. He would remember this night for the rest of his life, not for what he had said. For what began the very moment he said it. 4 words, spoken to be forgotten, had just begun. quietly, to unmake him. And by the time the sun rose over Ravenmoor, everything he believed about his life would already have started to come apart. Corvain did not sleep. He lay in the dark of his chambers and waited for his wolf to return to him, and it did not come. This was wrong in a way he had no words for. All his life, the beast had been there, a second heartbeat, a warmth at the back of his mind, closer than breath. Now there was only a cold hollow where it had lived, and a faint, far ache, like a wound in a limb that was no longer there. He rose long before dawn. He reached for the beast the way a man calls down into a deep well, and heard nothing answer. His hands were still unsteady. His skin felt a size too tight. Twice he found himself standing at the tall window, without deciding to staring past the wards, toward the gate and the road beyond, though he could not have told a living soul what he expected to see there. The first gray light was only beginning to touch the towers when the knock came. "Enter," he said. It was a guard, and the man's face was wrong, pale and careful, the face of someone bringing news he does not understand and wishes he were not carrying. "Forgive me, my king," the guard said. "There is a child." Corvain turned from the window. "A what?" "At the outer gate. A little girl. The watch found her at first light, curled against the stone where the wards run coldest, half frozen. She will not speak to the men. She will not loosen her grip on the iron. And, my king—" The guard hesitated. "Say it. She keeps asking for the one in the high seat. She says she has come to find her father." Something cold walked the length of Corvain's spine. He went down himself. He did not wait for her to be carried up. He went through the waking halls and the frost and the thin gray light, out to the great gate, where a small shape sat huddled against the iron. When he drew near, the shape lifted its head, and Corvain stopped as though he had walked into a wall. The child was perhaps 5 years old, small, thin, blue at the lips, with cold, her dark hair frozen against her cheeks, and her eyes. Her eyes were green. Not any green. His green, the strange pale storm green that had marked the alphas of Greymark for 9 generations. The green that watched him from every portrait in the long gallery. The green he found each morning in his own glass. She had his eyes. She had the line of his brow. She had the small, stubborn set of a jaw he knew intimately because it was his own. The world tilted, very slowly, beneath his boots. Around him the guards had gone silent. They saw it, too. Of course they saw it. It was not a thing a person could fail to see. Corvain lowered himself down onto one knee in the frost, so that his eyes were level with hers, and for a long moment neither of them moved. The child studied his face with a terrible searching attention, the way you check a thing against a picture you have carried a great distance, guarding it, afraid of losing it. "Whose child are you?" he said, and his voice did not sound like his own. She did not answer that. Instead, her small chapped lips trembled, and she asked a question of her own, in a voice worn thin by the long, cold night. "Are you the one who sent my mama away?" Corvain could not speak. The little girl's eyes filled and did not spill over, and she looked at him with all the grave and hopeless honesty that only very young children possess. And she said, the thing that would follow him down into every dark hour that came after. "Mama said you would not know her," she whispered. "She said you forgot her a long time ago. Then she said you would forget me too. The frost, the gray light, the ring of staring men." Corvain knelt before a child who wore his own eyes and felt the cold hollow where his wolf had lived, and somewhere, far away at the edge of everything, that severed rope went on trailing down into black water. Everything, he understood dimly, had already changed. He simply did not yet know how far, or how deep, or at whose hand. Corvain carried the child in himself. She would not let the guards touch her. She would let him. That was the first strange thing. She weighed almost nothing. She held to his coat with both small fists, pressed her frozen face to his chest, and shook. And something in him that had nothing to do with his lost wolf answered her, fierce and certain. He set 2 trusted guards at her door, and only then let the household come to look. Word of a green-eyed child at the gate had already run through Ravenmoor like flame through dry grass. His grandmother arrived first. The Dowager Verena swept in, and Corvain, who had spent a lifetime learning to read her, watched her the way a hunter watches a tree line. She looked at the child by the fire, and for the space of a single breath, she stopped. It was nothing. It was everything. Her step checked. The color beneath her powder drained. Her eyes, for one unguarded instant, were not cold and were not surprised. They were afraid. Then the mask slid back so smoothly that only a lifetime of watching her let him catch it. "Slip. What is this?" she said. "What beggar's child have they carried into your rooms?" "They found her at our own gate," Corvain said, and kept his eyes on his grandmother's hands, half frozen, asking for her father. Something moved through the dowager's long fingers, the smallest tightening quickly stilled. "Children ask for a great many things," Verena said. "The cold makes them fanciful." Behind her, Lady Ismena appeared in the doorway. She had come to curl her lip at a servant's brat, and she saw the child's face before she could school her own. Ismene's features went rigid and bloodless, and her gaze flew not to the child but to the dowager, frightened, questioning. The look of one who has watched a buried thing claw back into the light and does not know whether the grave will hold. Neither of them looked at the little girl with a stranger's ordinary pity. They looked at her with fear. And a person is only ever afraid of what they already know. Corvain said nothing of it. He had learned long ago that you do not show a snake you have seen it move. "Leave us," he said. "Both of you." They went. At the door, for less than a heartbeat, his grandmother and Ismene traded a single glance, quick and silent and full of shared reckoning. Most men would have missed it. Corvain did not. He sent for the healer. Old Wystan had served the hold since before Corvain drew breath, and had never learned to lie, which was why Corvain trusted him and no one else. The old man tended the child first, murmuring until she nearly smiled. Then, at his king's low command, he examined Corvain himself. For a long while, Wystan said nothing. His hands moved over Corvain's brow, his neck, the old faded mark at the base of his skull that he had been told all his life was a childhood fever scar. The healer's fingers went still upon it. His face changed. "My king," he said quietly. "Who told you this was a fever scar?" "My grandmother," Corvain said. "Why?" Wystan drew back. His hands, Corvain noticed, were no longer quite steady. "Because it is no scar," the old man said. "It is a binding. The mark of a rite, my king, a working of the old and forbidden kind, laid into your blood and sealed beneath a red moon. I have seen its like but once, in a book they burned for holding it. They named it the Severing." The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. "The Severing," Corvain repeated. "It cuts a man from something he was never meant to lose," Wystan said. "A true and fated bond. It cannot break such a bond, for no power can. So it buries it and teaches the mind to look upon the one it loves best in all the world and see only a stranger. It has lived in you, my king, for 6 years. 6 years! The number rang through him like a struck bell. 6 years past, he had fallen ill at a feast and lost a whole week of his life, and his grandmother had nursed him and told him after that he had very nearly died. And the child, Corvain said, his mouth had gone dry as ash. "Look again at the child." Wystan already had. When he turned back, his old eyes were wet. "She bears the beginning of the same mark," he said. "Faint, fresh. They have begun the same working upon her. And there is more, my king, that you will not wish to hear. Tell me." The healer glanced once at the door and dropped his voice until it was barely more than breath. 3 nights past, I was called in secret to the servants' wing, to a scarred maid, the household calls Sorrel. She had been beaten, badly, left in the cold to be found or not found. She begged me to tell no living soul, for she said that if they learned she still breathed, they would finish what they began. She did not flee this hold because she wished to be free of you, my king. She fled because someone within these walls means to see her dead and the child along with her. Corvain sat very still. Outside, the frost was melting from the towers of Ravenmoor, the day climbing bright and ordinary over a house he was only now beginning to see had been built upon a lie. He looked at the sleeping child with his own green eyes and thought of the 4 words he had spoken to be rid of her mother. "You mean nothing to me." And for the first time, Corvain began to wonder what exactly he had been made to forget. Corvain did not send men to bring Sorrel back. He went himself. He rode out with Wystan and 2 guards he trusted with his life, through the frost-white country beyond the wards, following the healer's careful memory of where a hunted woman might go to ground. His wolf did not ride with him. That was the strangeness he could not grow used to, for as long as he could remember, the beast had run beneath his skin on a road like this, straining ahead, glad of the cold. Now the saddle held only a man, hollow behind the ribs where a second heart had once beaten. They found her at dusk. She had gone to ground in the ruin of an old way station at the edge of the Hollow Marsh, that wide gray borderland where the kingdom thinned away into fog and reed and standing water. She had built no fire. A woman who fears being found does not build fires. She was wedged into the shadow of the broken hearth, with a length of iron bar in her fist, and when the door groaned open, she came up onto her feet ready to fight. Corvain understood in a single glance that she had been ready to fight for a very long time. Then she saw who had come, and something worse than fear crossed her face. "You," she said. The word carried a whole history in it. "I am not here to harm you," Corvain said. She laughed, thin and dry. The laugh of someone who has heard every gentle thing a powerful man can say, and learned exactly what each one costs. "No," she said, "you never are." "Briar is at Ravenmoor," he said. "She is safe. She is warm. She is asking for you." For the first time the iron wavered in her hand. Her whole body leaned toward the word, toward the child, the way a plant leans toward a window. And Corvain saw the truth of her plainly then, undefended. She would not cross the room for her king. She would walk through fire for that little girl. "You will take me to her," Sorrel said. It was not a question, it was a price. They rode back through the dark. She would not sit before him. She rode behind Wystan, rigid and silent, her eyes fixed on the black shape of Ravenmoor, rising against the stars, and not once did she look at Corvain, though he felt her awareness of him the whole way, the way you feel a wound you are trying not to touch. Briar was still awake when they came. She had refused to sleep. The moment the door opened and she saw her mother, the little girl made a sound Corvain had no name for, half a sob and half a laugh, and flung herself the length of the room. Sorrel went down on her knees on the cold stone and caught her and folded around her, and for a long moment the scarred woman who had faced a king with an iron bar simply held her child and shook, pressing her lips again and again to the small dark head, murmuring things too low to hear. Corvain stood apart by the door and watched, and something in his chest ached, a different ache entirely from the hollow where his wolf had been. He should not have been in the room. He knew it. This was not a thing meant for a stranger's eyes, and to Sorrel he was a stranger, and worse than a stranger, yet he could not make himself leave. Watching her love that child felt like standing at a lit window in the cold, looking in at a warmth he had somehow, impossibly, lost the way back to. Then Sorrel lifted her head, and her eyes found his, over the top of Briar's hair, and the warmth in them went out like a snuffed candle. Later, when the child slept at last, he spoke to her alone. "I know something was done to me," he said quietly, "6 years ago. There is a mark on me, a rite. My own healer named it tonight. I do not remember you. I believe now that I was made not to." Sorrel stood at the dark window with her arms wrapped around herself. and for a long while she said nothing at all. "Do you know," she said finally, "how many nights I told myself a story, like that one, that it was not truly his doing, that something had been done to him, that any morning now he would come down the road, and it would all prove a terrible mistake." She turned. Her face was very calm, and the calm was the most frightening thing about it. "I told myself that story for 2 years. Then I stopped. Because a story that never comes true is only a slower way of being a fool." "I am telling you it is true," Corvain said. "You are telling me now," she said, "that there is a reason you looked at me across your bright hall and named me nothing." She let that rest between them. "Even if it is true, my king, even if every word is true, where were you the night they took it from you? Where were you all the mornings? After a right may steal a memory, it does not steal 6 years. It does not raise a child. It did not sit up through the fever that gave me this." She touched the scar at her throat without seeming to know she did it. "You were not there. Whatever the reason, you were not there. And I stopped waiting for the reason. A long time ago." Corvain had faced armies. He had never in his life felt so completely disarmed. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Please, tell me, and I will set it right. Whatever it costs. Whoever it costs." Something flickered in her, then quick and painful there and gone. For half a breath she was not ice. For half a breath she was a young woman under a moon, her face open, and Corvain's stalled heart lurched toward it. Then she closed like a door. "If you truly wish to know what was done," she said, "do not ask me." She was already turning back toward her sleeping daughter, back behind her walls. "Ask your grandmother what she buried under the blood moon," and she would say no more. Over the days that followed, Corvain came to the guarded wing more often than a king had any cause to. He told himself it was the investigation. There were witnesses to question, records to pull, a killer somewhere inside his own walls to find before they struck again. All of that was true. None of it was why his feet carried him down that corridor each afternoon as the light turned gold. It was the child. Briar did not trust him. She watched him the way the borderland deer watched the hunt, ready to bolt, measuring every door. But she did not send him away. And slowly, without either of them ever naming it, a truce grew between them, built out of small and careful things. She had a pouch of stones. She kept them in a little gray bag, worn soft with handling, a dozen smooth river stones, polished by the water and by her thumb. One afternoon he found her laying them out on the warm hearthstones in a careful ring, and he lowered himself to the floor across from her and asked, because he could not help it, what they were. "They are everyone," Briar said, as though this were plain to any fool. She touched the largest, a gray oval flecked with white. "Mama," then a small round one at its side. "That is me." Then the others, one at a time. "This is Stan. He gives me honey. This is the cook who looks mean and is not. This is the horse that let me ride." She named her whole small world, stone by stone, and Corvain found himself absurdly moved that a child could build a family out of the things a river throws away. Then he saw that one stone sat apart from all the others, outside the ring, pale, almost white. "And that one?" he asked. Briar looked at it a long moment. Then she set her small hand over it, covering it the way you cover a thing that is precious, or a thing that hurts. "That one does not have a name yet," she said, and would not speak of it again. He asked her once whether any of the stones was his. Briar considered him with her grave green eyes, the eyes that were his own, and shook her head slowly. "Not yet," she said. "Mama has to say first." Then she gathered them all back into the pouch, as though the question itself had frightened her, and would not bring them out again that day. She spoke of other things, though, in the sideways way of children when she forgot to be guarded. She told him that Mama sang at night, when she thought Briar was asleep, always the same song, and always to the window, as though the window were a person. She told him that Mama did not watch the road the way people in stories did. Mama watched the moon. Every night, the moon, until it set. Briar did not know why. She only knew that on the nights the moon was covered, her mother did not sleep at all. On those nights, Briar said, Mama sat by the cold hearth with something small held tight in her hand, and in the morning her eyes would be red, and she would smile and say she had only dreamed of the sea. Briar had never seen the sea. She did not think her mother had either. "What is this song?" Corvain asked, more lightly than he felt, and Briar sang it for him. It was a small thing, a few worn lines about a light left burning and a door left open. Her voice was thin and true, and halfway through the second line, something happened in Corvain's skull, a sudden bright tearing, and for one instant he was not in the warm room at all. He was somewhere in rain, under trees that ran with silver, and a woman was singing that exact song low against his shoulder, and he almost turned his head to see her face. Then it was gone, and he was on the floor of the guarded wing, with his heart slamming and a child staring at him in alarm, and he did not know how long he had sat there saying nothing. He did not tell her what had happened. He did not fully understand it himself. That night Wistan found him, in his study, gray to the lips. "You are worse," the old man said. He was not asking. He took Corvain's wrist, felt the slow uneven beat there, looked into his eyes. "The binding is tearing, my king. Now that you have struck at the bond it hid, it was meant to lie quiet forever. You have woken it, and it is bleeding, and I will not lie to you about where that road ends." "Then mend it," Corvain said. Wistan was quiet. "There is only one way a severing is unmade," he said at last. "It is undone only the way it was first made true, under a red moon, by the two souls it bound, both of them present, and both of them willing. The next red moon rises in 3 weeks, my king, on the very night they have set for your joining to the Lady Ismene." Corvain went still. "And if I miss it," he said. "Then the bond dies, for good," said Wistan, "and your wolf with it, and I think in time the rest of you as well. There will not be another red moon in time. There is this one. There is no other, and if I do nothing," Corvain said. Wistan would not meet his eyes. "Days," he said, "a handful of weeks at the most. The wolf goes first, then the strength, then the will. I have watched a severing take a man before, my king. It is a quiet death. From the outside it looks like nothing worse than a strong man deciding, one gray morning, that he would rather stop." Corvain sat with that a long while after the healer had gone. 2 nights later, the child brought him the pale stone herself. She came to him where he sat by her fire, and she was solemn in the way of a child entrusting a great secret, and she opened her small fist. It was not a river stone at all. It hung from a broken cord, a smooth pale gem, the color of the moon behind cloud, and it was old, and it was worn, and Corvain had never in his remembered life laid eyes on it. "Mama keeps it hidden," Briar whispered. "She lets me hold it on my birthday. She says it belongs to someone who got lost. She won't tell me who." And she put it into his open hand. The moment the stone touched his palm, the world went white. There was no rain in the room, and yet he could hear it. Corvain stood with the pale stone burning cold in his fist and the white light behind his eyes slowly clearing, and for a moment he did not know the year, or the room, or his own name. He knew only the weight of the stone, which his hand seemed to know better than he did, his fingers closing around it in a shape they had made 1,000 times before he had ever, to his knowledge, seen it. Briar was watching him, frightened. He made himself smile for her. It cost him everything he had. "Where is your mother?" he said. Sorrel was in the inner room. She turned when he came in, and then she saw what he was holding, and every drop of color left her face. "Where you got that?" she said. Her voice had gone very quiet and very careful, the voice of a person walking on ice over deep water. "Briar gave it to me," he said. She said, "It belongs to someone who got lost. Give it back." Sorrel crossed the room fast, her hand out. "Give it back to her. It is hers. It is the only thing of his I ever let her keep." "Of whose?" Corvain said. She stopped. They stood a pace apart, the pale stone between them in his open hand, and something in the air had changed, had grown thin and dangerous, and Corvain knew, with the certainty of a man at a cliff edge, that whatever came next could not be taken back. "What happened at the Hollow Marsh?" he said. Her head came up as though he had struck her. "You said that name?" Corvain went on, low. "Before I ever remembered it was a name. My healer said it and I felt it in my teeth. Something happened there to you, to me. Tell me." He held the stone up between them. "Tell me what this is." For a long moment he thought she would not. Her jaw was tight, her eyes bright and furious and afraid. And then something in her simply gave way, the way a dam does not crack, but rather, all at once, is gone, and 6 years came pouring through. "You gave it to me there," she said. The words came out shaking. "Under the full moon, at the water's edge, where the reeds were silver. You put it around my neck with your own hands. You said the stone had been in your line for 9 generations, and no bride of Greymark had ever worn it who was not loved past reason." She was crying now, and did not seem to know it. "You said that no distance, and no dark, and no working of any priest alive would ever keep you from me. You said that if the whole world made you forget your own name, your wolf would still know my scent and carry you home. You promised me. And I believed you, because you were the first living soul who ever looked at me and did not see the scar first." Corvain could not speak. The stone was ice in his hand and his heart was a wild thing behind his ribs. "I was a healer's girl at the marsh edge," Sorrel said. "Nobody, less than nobody, you told your court. I nursed a hurt stranger who wandered out of the fog half dead and did not know his own name. And I did not know he was a king, and by the time either of us knew, it was already too late. We were already each other's." She wiped at her face with the back of her wrist, angry, as though the tears were a betrayal. "Then, the guards came and found you. And you held my face and you swore you needed only a little time to set your house in order, that you would come back for me and no power in the kingdom would stop you. And you rode away up that road. And I stood and watched until you were smaller than my hand. And that, my king, was the last time you ever knew my face." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below, the ordinary sounds of the hold went on, indifferent. "I waited," Sorrel said, and now her voice was almost gentle, which was worse than any scream. Not the way the girls in the songs wait. "I waited like a woman waits, through a first winter and a second. I sold what I had. I bore your daughter, alone in a cold room with no hand to hold. I told her, when she was old enough to ask, that her father was a story, because a story cannot break a child's heart the way a living man who never comes can. The village had a name for me, by then. The Marsh Woman, they called me, who told her fatherless girl she had a king for a father. They laughed at Briar in the lane for it. So, I stopped saying your name aloud, even to her, even in the dark, because my madness was becoming her shame, and she had done nothing. Nothing at all, but be born from a promise a man forgot. And every year the tale reached me a little clearer. The Alpha King had put his marsh madness behind him. The Alpha King would take a high-born Luna. The Alpha King had never spoken of a marsh girl at all." She lifted her chin. "So no. Do not stand in my child's room holding the last honest thing you ever gave me and tell me a right is to blame. I stopped needing you to be innocent a long time ago. I only needed you to stay gone." And there it was, the whole of it, laid open and bleeding between them. Corvain looked down at the moonstone in his palm and he thought of the bright hall and of his own voice, saying, "You mean nothing to me," and of the thing that had lunged inside him in that same instant, the thing he had crushed, the thing that had cried out a word he could not hear. His wolf. His wolf had known her, even severed, even silenced, even buried under 6 years of a stranger's right. His wolf had lunged across that hall to reach her, exactly as he had sworn under the marsh moon it would. He had kept the promise. Some deep and wordless part of him had gone on keeping it the whole time, screaming her name into a silence his ruined mind could not hear. For 6 years the beast had paced a cage with no door, howling for a woman its master could not recall, and every wolf of Greymark had thought their king merely cold. He had not been cold. He had been a house with someone locked deep in the cellar, and he had walked its bright rooms year after year, and never once heard the knocking beneath his feet. The knowing broke over him like cold water, and with it, at last, came the memory, whole. Her face, not a fragment, not a ghost, in the rain. Her face, young and unscarred, and turned up to a silver moon, laughing at something he had said, looking at him as though he were the whole of the sky. The most precious thing he had ever held in his life, and he had let them take it out of his own head, and had gone 6 years without even the ache of missing it. Corvain made a sound he had never made before. And then the hollow behind his ribs, the cold, empty place where his wolf had been, flooded all at once with a pain so vast and so total that his knees struck the stone floor without his deciding to kneel. The room tilted. Sorrel's face swam above him, and something crossed it that she would surely have hidden if she had had the time. Something that was not hatred at all. For all her armor, for all the 6 years, she reached for him. Her hands closed hard on his shoulders as he went down, as though she meant to hold up a weight that no one soul was ever built to hold. The edges of everything went dark. The last thing he felt was the moonstone still locked in his fist. And the last thing he heard, very far away, was a child's voice crying out, and then the dark closed over his head like marsh water, and Corvain knew nothing more. He woke to candlelight, and the sour green smell of the healer's herbs, and for one clean and merciful moment, he remembered nothing at all. Then it came back, the whole of it, and he understood that the forgetting had been the last kindness left to him, and that it too was gone now, forever. Wystan sat beside the bed, gray with sleeplessness. "How long?" Corvain asked. His voice was a ruin. "A day and a night," the old man said. "Your heart stopped once, my king, in the black hour before this dawn. It started again of its own accord. I have never in my life been so glad to be made a fool of by a heartbeat." Corvain closed his eyes. Behind them everything was clear now, unbearably clear. Not only the marsh, not only her face turned up to the silver water. He remembered the rest. He remembered the night they had cut her out of him. He remembered riding home from the hollow marsh 6 years past with the whole of his heart pointed back over his shoulder, drunk on a gladness he had never known before or since, throwing open the doors of Ravenmoor to tell them all that he had found her. That he would bring a healer's girl from the marsh edge to stand as Luna of Greymark, and they could keep their high-born daughters and their careful alliances. He remembered his grandmother's face going very still. He remembered how swiftly she had smiled after, how gently she had agreed, how she had pressed a cup of warm wine into his hands and bidden him rest after so long a road. He remembered waking on cold stone beneath a moon, the color of a wound. There had been candles set in a ring. There had been a woman in gray robes he had half known, the old Right Priestess Nissa, her hands stained, dark to the wrist, her voice climbing and falling in words that hurt the ear to hear. There had been his grandmother close beside his head, her voice soft as any lullaby, and merciless as a blade, telling him over and over that there had been no girl, that the marsh had been the dream of a fever, that he had been gravely ill, and was only now returning to himself. There had been Ismene at the edge of the candlelight, lovely and composed, watching a man be unmade, the way another woman might watch a gown being pinned and fitted. And there had been, at the very last, a moment Corvain knew he would never forgive himself for having survived. A moment when he had felt something deep inside him, something that wore her face, being walled up alive while it cried out a name, and he had reached for it with everything left in him, and had not been strong enough, and had felt it go dark behind the stone. They had buried his love for her, while he still lay in the room, And in the morning, he had risen and thanked his grandmother for her tender care through his sickness, and had not thought of the Hallmarsh again for 6 long years. Corvain opened his eyes. There were tears on his face, and he let them fall. "I remember all of it," he said. "I remember them doing it to me." Wystan bowed his old head. "I feared you would," he said. "It is a heavier thing to carry than the not knowing, but it is the truth, and a man cannot mend what he will not look at." "Then tell me how it is mended," Corvain said. "You have been reading. I can see it on you. Tell me there is a road back." The healer told him then what he had spent the day and the night, drawing out of the pages of a book he had saved from the burning years ago, and never brought himself to destroy. "A severing worked under a red moon cannot be lifted by force," Wystan said, "nor by any hand but the two it wounded. It was made the way a false thing is made, by a priest, upon a sleeping man who could not say no. It can be unmade only the way a true thing is made in the first place, by the two bound souls themselves, both willing, both awake, beneath a red moon, with the bond's own anchor held between their hands." "The anchor," Corvain said, and turned his head to the moonstone where it lay on the table by the bed, pale and patient in the candlelight. "The stone you clasped upon her throat under the marsh moon," Wystan said. "A true bond leaves its print upon such a thing, deeper than any right can reach. It is the one road back through the dark. The two of you must stand beneath the red moon and take it up between you and let the buried bond tear its way back to the surface." After 6 years walled in silence, he paused and would not look away, which was his way of being kind. "And I will not soften it for you, my king. A bond torn open and starved so long, then forced whole again in the space of a single night, is a violence done to the heart, to both hearts. Yours and hers, laid on the same table, at the same hour. It has killed as many as it has healed, perhaps more." "And when?" Corvain said, though the cold in his belly told him he already knew. "The red moon rises once more in its turning," he said, "and then not again for a full year. It rises on the very night they mean to bind you to the Lady Ismene. That night, my king, that night or never." Corvain lay still and looked at the pale stone and worked the cruel arithmetic of it. To live, he must stand under that red moon with Sorrel at his side and the anchor in their joined hands. And she must be willing to risk her own heart, stopping in her chest, for the sake of a bond that a king had stood by and let them sever. Willing to wager the single life that stood between her daughter and an empty world, on the honor of the man who had once looked at her across a bright hall and called her nothing. He had already asked her to trust the last thing on earth she had any reason to trust. Now he would have to ask her to lay down her life beside his and hope. And there was no one beneath any moon who could make that choice for her. Corvain did not sleep that night, though his body begged him to. He sat by the low fire and turned the whole ruined shape of it over in his hands, and slowly, in the dark, his grief changed. It did not lessen, it hardened, it took on edges. He understood now that he could not simply throw open the doors and name his grandmother a traitor before the hold. She had ruled the shadows of Ravenmoor for 40 years. If he moved against her openly and too soon, she would slip free of it, or she would deny it with that serene and perfect face until the old blood of the court doubted their own king. Or, worse than either, she would reach out one last quiet time and finish what she had begun at the marsh, and see Sorrel and the child cold before he could stop her hand. So, he would not move too soon. He would do the last thing any of them would expect of him. He would give them exactly what they wanted. He would let the preparations go forward. He would let his grandmother believe he had bent, at the end, the way she had always taught him a king must bend. He would let Ismene fit her silver gown. He would let the banners rise. And on the night of the red moon, before the whole gathered kingdom, in the very hour they meant to bind him to a lie, he would turn their own ceremony into the blade that ended them. It was a cold plan, and it asked him to smile at monsters for 3 more weeks. Corvain looked into the fire until the last log fell to embers, and found that he could. He held to the plan for 3 long weeks, and they were the hardest of his life. He let his grandmother touch his cheek and call him her good and dutiful boy. He let Esmene take his arm at the high table, and did not let his skin crawl show upon his face. He signed what was put before him. He smiled. And beneath the smiling, he and Wyston worked in the dark, quietly, patiently, gathering the proof of it thread by thread, so that when the hour came, no serene denial could unmake it. Twice in those weeks. Once when his grandmother laid the marriage contract before him and spoke fondly of the grandchildren to come, and he had to hold the pen steady and sign his name beneath a lie. Once when Briar, who did not understand why he came to her less often now, asked him in a small voice whether he too was going to forget her, and he had to smile and swear that he never would, and walk out into the corridor before his face could betray him. They found more than Corvain had dreamed. They found the old Right Priestess Nissa, long since pensioned to a house at the wood's edge, who wept the moment the king's men came to her door, as though she had been waiting 6 years to be caught. They found the record of a red moon rite, paid for out of the dowager's own coffers. They found the physicians she had bought. They found the orders, in her own clean hand, moving away every servant who had glimpsed a marsh girl at the king's side, silencing every witness one by one. And they found, worst of all, the newer things. The men she had sent to a cottage at the marsh edge, more than once across the years, to frighten a stubborn woman into silence or into her grave. The beating, mere weeks past that had driven Sorrel bleeding into the cold. And the small fresh working, begun in secret upon a sleeping child, to teach a little girl, too, in time, to look upon her own father and see a stranger. On the eve of the ceremony, Corvain went to his grandmother's rooms, with the whole of it in a plain wooden box, and he set it on the table between them, and he watched the serene and perfect face at last begin to crack. She tried the old ways first. She smiled. She reached for his hand. She spoke of duty, of the bloodline, of generations of Grimark alphas who had never once let their hearts rule their thrones. When that failed, she grew cold, and told him plainly that she had done nothing she would not do again, that a marsh healer's base-born girl could never have stood as Luna, that she had saved him from throwing away everything his forefathers had built for the sake of a pretty fever. She had wanted, only, she said, for the woman to have the good sense to disappear, that the marsh girl had clung so stubbornly to life, and to a promise was in the dowager's telling the woman's own fault and the cause of everything that had followed. She spoke of a beaten, bleeding mother, the way another woman might speak of a stain that would not lift from good cloth. "You did not save me," Corvain said. "You reached into my skull, and you buried the best thing I ever was. And, when it would not die quietly, you tried to bury the woman too, and now you have laid your hand upon my daughter." For the first time in his life, he saw the Dowager Verena afraid, not sorry. She was never once sorry. Only afraid, at the last, of what her grandson had become while she was not watching. The door opened then, and Ismene came in, summoned by a servant loyal only to gold, and she saw the box on the table and the ruin on the old woman's face, and she understood everything in a single breath. Her lovely composure broke apart. She began to plead. She had only loved him. She said she had only done as the dowager bid. She had wanted so little. Only the place beside him that should have been hers, by blood and by right. Corvain looked at her, and at his grandmother, and felt nothing for either of them but a great and weary cold. "Say what you will tomorrow," he told them. "The whole kingdom will be listening." Then he went at last to the guarded wing to tell Sorrel that the red moon rose the next night, and that he would stand beneath it and beg her to save them both, and that whatever she chose, she and Briar would be free of the shadow that had hunted them for 6 years. The wing was dark, the fire was cold, The guards at the door had been sent away by a lady of the house, they said, hours before, and had thought nothing of obeying her. Inside, the rooms were empty. Briar's little gray pouch lay open upon the floor, the river stones scattered where a child had left them in a hurry, and the horse, and the cook, and the honey, giving old man all lay where they had fallen. He knelt and gathered them, anyway, one by one, and set them in a careful row upon the cold hearth, because he could not bear to leave a child's whole world scattered across the floor. And on the cold hearthstone, set down carefully, deliberately, where he could not fail to find it, lay the moonstone. She had left it behind. She had left him the last honest thing he had ever given her, and taken the child, and gone. Somewhere in the dark she had heard what the reforging would ask of her, or the dowager's threat had found her one final time, and she had made the only choice a mother could make. She had chosen to stay alive for her daughter, and to let a dying king and his broken bond go down into the dark alone. Corvain stood in the empty room with the anchor stone cold in his fist. The red moon would rise the next night and set before the dawn, and it would not rise red again for a year, and he did not have a year, he had one night. And the only soul who could stand with him beneath that moon had just walked out of his life for the second time, and this time she had every reason in the world. The kingdom gathered beneath a rising red moon, and every soul in it believed it had come to see a wedding. They filled the great court of Ravenmoor as they had not filled it in a generation. Nobles, in their finest, warriors of the border packs, elders with the old moon marks tattooed blue upon their brows, torches lined the ceremonial road. The banners of Greymark and of the bride's house hung side by side above the high platform, and above them all hung the moon, swelling slowly to the color of old blood as the night deepened. It was, everyone agreed, a most fortunate omen for a joining. Only 3 people in that whole vast crowd knew what the red moon truly meant, and one of them was dying of it by the hour. Corvain stood upon the platform in the black of Greymark, and no one who looked at his still face guessed that his wolf lay silent as a stone within him, or that his own heart stumbled now with every third beat. Sat. His grandmother stood at his right hand, in her silver serene once more, certain he had bent as he always bent. Ismene came along the torchlit road in a gown like woven moonlight, radiant, triumphant, sure at last of the place she had schemed 6 years to take. The high elder raised his hands and began the old words of joining. Corvain let him speak 3 lines. Then he stepped forward to the very edge of the platform, and he loosed the smallest part of what remained of his alpha power out across the courtyard, and thousands of voices died at once into silence. "Hear me," he said, and his voice carried to the farthest wall. "I have brought you here under false colors, and for that I will answer. But you will hear the truth of your king before this night is out, every last soul of you, so that it can never again be buried." Ismene had stopped upon the road. The high elder had gone pale. The dowager Verena did not move at all, and only Corvain was close enough to see her hands close slowly into the silver folds of her gown. "There is no joining tonight," Corvain said. "There was never going to be." The crowd broke into a roar, and he let it, and when it faded, he told them everything. He told them of a healer's girl at the Hollow Marsh, who had pulled a dying stranger from the fog and never once asked his name. He told them of a bond made true beneath the marsh moon, and a promise, and a stone. He told them of a red moon rite worked upon a sleeping man by a bot priestess, at the order of his own grandmother, with the Lady Ismene watching. He told them of 6 years of silenced witnesses and altered records, and men sent in the dark to frighten and to beat, and at the last to kill a woman whose only crime was to have been loved by their king. He told them of a mark begun upon a sleeping child. A sound moved through the crowd, then low and terrible. The sound of 1,000 wolves understanding all at once that they had gathered to bless a crime. The border warriors turned hard eyes upon the platform. The gray elders drew back from the dowager as from a thing unclean. The court had gone from roaring to a silence deeper than any command could make. And into that silence, Corvain turned to the woman, in the gown of woven moonlight, and to the old woman in silver, and he passed his judgment where the whole kingdom could stand witness and remember. "Lady Yasmin," he said, "I will never be bound to you, in this life or in any moon to come. You will leave my lands before this red moon sets, and you will not return while I draw breath. Take nothing but what you carry. You have already taken 6 years that were not yours." She fell to her knees on the stones and wept, and no one moved to lift her, and that was answer enough. Then he faced his grandmother, and for a long moment he could not speak, because even now, even knowing all of it, some foolish boy inside him grieved the woman he had believed she was. "You will not be exiled," he said at last, and heard the crowd stir. "Not because you have earned mercy, you have earned far less than exile, but because you are my blood, and because I will not let what you did to me teach me to be you. You are stripped, this night, of every title, every honor, and every voice in the affairs of this hold. You will live out your years, shut away from the court you poisoned, and you will do it knowing that the kingdom heard from your king's own mouth exactly what you are." The Dowager Verena said nothing. For the first time in 40 years, she had nothing left to say. "And hear one thing more," he said, turning back to the silent thousands, "and carry it to every corner of my lands. There is a woman at the marsh edge named Sorrel, who saved your king twice over, once from the fog and once from himself. She is my true and fated mate. She is your Luna, and has been these 6 years, whatever right, or liar, told you otherwise. Her name will be spoken in this hall with honor for as long as it stands." Corvain turned from all of it then, and looked up at the red moon riding higher toward its cold height, and felt the hours left to him bleeding away. Somewhere out in that dark, at the edge of a gray marsh, was the only soul who could keep his heart beating past the dawn, and she did not want to be found. He took the moonstone from within his black coat, and closed his fist around it, and went down from the platform, past the weeping woman and the silent old one, past the staring thousands, toward the gate, and a fast horse, and a long road to the hollow marsh. "Ride," he told the dark. There was so little moon left. "Ride." The red moon stood high and terrible over the hollow marsh when Corvain came down out of the reeds at last, his horse blown, his own heart lurching like a bird against a window. The old cottage stood where his returned memory had promised it would, small and dark at the water's edge, a single candle burning in the window like the one in the child's worn song. He half fell from the saddle. He crossed the wet ground on legs that no longer entirely obeyed him. And the door opened before he reached it, and Sorrel stood in the light with Briar's sleeping shape behind her on the bed and a look on her face that was equal parts fury and fear. "You should not have come," she said. "I left the stone so you would not come." "I know," Corvain said. "You cannot ask me this." Her voice shook. "I have a child. I am all she has in the world. You want me to stand under that thing and let it stop my heart for a bond. You let them cut out of you." She was crying now openly past caring. "I stopped being able to lose you a long time ago. I taught myself. Do not undo it now, just so you have someone to hold your hand while you die." "Then I will not ask you," Corvain said. He held the moonstone out to her upon his open palm. "The way you offer something to a wild thing you have no right to tame." "I did not ride here to ask you to save me," he said. "I rode here to give you this back, and to say the thing they took my chance to say, 6 years ago. I love you. I loved you at the marsh, and I loved you across that bright hall while they're working, made me name it nothing. And my wolf loved you even after they buried the rest of me." He could barely stand now. The moon was already tilting westward, toward the reeds, toward setting. "Whatever you choose, it is yours to choose, and I will bless it with my last breath. Stay alive for her. That is a good and worthy reason, and I will not spend one moment of what I have left making you feel less for it." He set the stone gently in her hand, and closed her fingers over it, and stepped back, to leave her free, and the strength went out of his legs, and he sat down hard in the doorway with the marsh moon going low behind him. Sorrel looked down at the pale stone in her fist. She looked back at her sleeping daughter. And then she looked at the man dying in her doorway. The man who had not asked, who had left the choosing to her, and something crossed her face that 6 years of armor had never quite killed. The same thing that had reached for him when he fell, that had never once stopped watching the moon. "Curse you," she whispered, and it sounded like a vow. "Curse you. I never could keep away." She stepped out under the red moon. She sank down into the doorway and gathered his failing weight against her and pressed the moonstone flat between their two joined hands over his stumbling heart. And she said the old words of the marsh, the true words, willing and awake. And the buried bond, after 6 years walled in the dark, tore its way up into the light. It was agony and joy at once. Corvain felt his silent wolf wake with a howl that shook him to the bone, felt the hollow behind his ribs flood not with pain now but with her, felt both their hearts falter on the same terrible edge and hang there together over the dark, and then, together, hold. His wolf surged up whole, and singing the bond snapped taut and golden between them, unbreakable, made true a second time by two souls who had every reason to run and had chosen instead to stay. Above the marsh, the red moon slipped down into the reeds and was gone, and they were both still breathing. They did not go back to Ravenmoor for a long while. So, he stayed at the marsh edge through the turning of the season, in the small cottage where a healer's girl had once saved a stranger's life, and learned, slowly, the shape of the family that had gone on without him. He learned that Briar was afraid of the deep water and brave about nearly everything else. He learned that she gave her stones names only when she was certain of a person, and that one gray morning, without a word, she took his hand and pressed a smooth new stone into it, one she had chosen from the shallows herself, and did not tell him what it was for. She did not have to. He carried it in his pocket after that, everywhere, like the crown he no longer cared about. One evening near the end of that season, the three of them sat on the worn step of the cottage, watching the sun sink red into the marsh. Briar leaned against his side, as though she had always done it, and after a while, she looked up at him with her solemn green eyes, his own eyes, and asked the question he had both waited for and dreaded. "Did it hurt," she asked, "when you forgot us?" Corvain was quiet a long time. "No," he said at last, "and that is the worst of it, small one. It should have hurt every single day. They built it so cleverly that it did not hurt at all, and that is how I know it was the cruelest thing anyone ever did to me. A good thing forgotten ought to leave a wound. They took even the wound away." Briar thought about that with the whole seriousness of her 5 years. "I will remind you," she decided, "every day, so it can never be taken again." Corvain could not speak. He drew her in against him and felt Sorrel's hand settle over his on the worn wood of the step, warm and sure and no longer walled away. He had been given back a thing almost no one is ever given back, and he meant to spend the rest of his life being worthy of it. Above the marsh, the first stars came out, and the water went to silver. And somewhere deep and content within him, his wolf lay down at last and slept. Thank you for staying with Corvain, Sorrel, and Little Briar to the end of their story. If their long road back to each other moved you even half as much as it moved me to tell it, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so the next tale finds you the night it rises. And before you go, I would love to know one thing. Where in this wide world are you listening from tonight? Leave your town, your country, your corner of the map in the comments, because it always astonishes me how far this pack of ours reaches. Until the next full moon, dear ones, be gentle with yourselves, hold your loved ones a little closer, and may the moon light every road that leads you home.